The fourth main change that's happening in adolescence, again, according to lots and lots of research studies, is that thinking becomes more multidimensional. What this means is that adolescents are able to see problems from multiple perspectives. So, when we were last talking about one of the other changes about what's possible instead of what's real, we also talked about perspective taking. But here it's literally being able to weigh multiple perspectives at once. So, for example, if I am trying to decide which college to go to when I am a senior in high school, I might be hearing perspectives from my college career or my college counselor, or my guidance counselor. I might be hearing perspectives from my mom, from my dad, from my best friend, from my older sibling who already went away to college, from my own perspective. And I'm able to weigh these things and to compare them in a way that I couldn't do fully in childhood. This helps us understand that people and personalities are complex. So, for example, if you are interacting with a friend and that friend is being really grumpy, you're able to think about this multidimensionally. What might be going on in that friend's life, at that moment at least, that is making them grumpy? This is often multidimensional. Perhaps they are struggling with a significant other. Perhaps they're having problems with parents. Perhaps they didn't do as well as they could have on their algebra test. And perhaps that's sometimes just who they are, understanding that some people are grumpier than others, a temperament difference or personality difference. And so this helps us understand people because we're able to, again, weigh all of these different factors and decide how we should respond accordingly. This also helps us understand social situations. So, again, related to that specific friend, but if that friend said something really snarky to you, how are you going to interpret it? Or if there's other people involved, how are you going to interpret it? These are multidimensional issues. And lastly, this helps us understand sarcasm in a way that we can't fully do in childhood. Again, like with the puns and analogies and metaphors where children aren't fully able to understand those, there are individual differences, but as a whole, sarcasm is another thing that's really complex because it's not just what you're saying, but your tone of voice or how you're saying it. And, this is one of those things where if you have ever sent a text that you meant to be sarcastic, how do you express that sarcasm? Maybe you use an emoji with like a rolling eye emoji or something along those lines, an emoticon. And the reader of that text doesn't know necessarily how to take it, so there can be some kind of confusion. In real life and in the real world, when we're speaking to one another, again, it's not just like what you're saying, but how you're saying it. There's multiple dimensions there. Again, to fully understand that, think about texts you may have sent or communications that weren't received in the right way. So this is a big change that happens in adolescence that children aren't fully capable of as a whole. The last main change that happens in adolescent thinking is that adolescents are able to see things as relative rather than absolute. This means that they can see the gray area. So, when we are children, we don't tend to question authority. So, if a parent, a police officer, a teacher, anybody in charge is telling us something, we really just think that is an absolute truth as a whole, right? But in adolescence, we start to be like, wait a second, that's not necessarily reality. It's relative. So we start to question other people's assertions or what they've told us. We're less likely to accept facts as just like this is the end all be all. When we think about fights that occur in, particularly in early adolescence, mid adolescence with parents, some of it comes down to this because we're actually questioning what our parents are saying when we didn't do that in childhood, at least not to the same degree. And parents don't necessarily know how to respond to that because it is a big change. Why are you questioning me? Well, this is in line with just how we start to think differently. We know that there isn't one right answer for a lot of things, or we want to know why. We want the explanation. We don't just want the, this is the end all be all absolute, but why? So this is understanding the gray area. So to summarize, we've talked about 5 main changes that have happened or that occur in adolescent thinking. These aren't the only changes that happen in adolescent thinking, but these are like the 5 biggest ones according to the research. Next, we're going to turn to 2 different theoretical approaches or perspectives on adolescent thinking. You've already read about Piaget from your Couther book or Vantage reading, so we're going to talk about him just briefly, but we're going to do the Piagetian approach, and then we're also going to talk about information processing theories. Again, 2 different theoretical perspectives on adolescent thinking. So in Piaget's formal operational period, one of the key things that Piaget observed, again in his small sample size, was that adolescents develop an abstract system known as propositional logic. Um, Again, I already mentioned that one of the key findings based on empirical research is that adolescents can think abstractly. So this is in alignment with Piaget's original ideas. Piaget's ideas came before all of that empirical research. Propositional logic is this idea that, you're looking at multiple dimensions at once, that if A is true or B is true, then C is true. So for example, if I get an A on this paper or an A on the exam, I can pass the class. Then C is true. If Tommy or Jimmy ask me to the dance, then I'll go, or then I'll have a date. So you're looking at multiple dimensions. This example from South Park in the corner, if you're familiar with it, there's a South Park, I don't know, joke that gingers, redheads, don't have souls. So for my example of abstract system of propositional logic, if Dr. Nordling is a ginger, I'm going to use and instead of or because it also applies here, and gingers don't have souls, then what does that say about me? That me as a ginger doesn't have a soul. Obviously, this is all just for jest and as an example. So how does this match the research? Again, Piaget is coming before all of this. This matches the research in that adolescents, again, based on research, can think about different possibilities. Adolescents are thinking more multidimensionally, and adolescents are thinking abstractly. So even though Piaget's ideas are flawed in many ways, and his sample size of 3 is not representative of all children and adolescents everywhere, there is some truth behind or support behind his idea of propositional logic. I want to make it clear that one of Piaget's flaws or his theory's flaw is that there are some children who can think this way at an earlier age. So just keep that in mind. That doesn't have to be starting at firmly the age of 12 when you're entering this formal operational period, that children or children who are older than 10, 11 can start to use this propositional logic. But still, Piaget was a starting point for the field. The next theory I wanted to talk about is information processing theory. Information processing theory is a broad theory. It's not specific to developmental psychology. It's not specific to adolescence, but it's this idea that we process information like a computer. And so one of the main things when we think about information processing theory is that's most commonly studied is memory. And you can directly think about your computer and how your computer has memory. So in this little figure right here, you see that like a human brain or like a human, a computer has input devices. These are similar to our senses. We have this central processing unit when your computer is thinking. We can relate this to our short-term memory when we're actively working through information, or our working memory. And your computer has hard drive storage just like our long-term memory. And so based on this information processing theory, we could talk about the changes that are taking place in adolescence, and we'll do so on the next slide. In general, there are 5 areas of information processing that improve in adolescence. I know that there are 5 main areas of change, again, that we've already talked about, so don't get these confused. The 5 areas of change broadly are different than these 5 areas of information processing specifically. Remember, information processing is like how we are just like computers. So, the first one is that attention improves. And attention improves in adolescence in multiple ways, in both selective and divided attention. So selective attention is merely just paying attention closely to something. In adolescence, we gain skills in these areas. And divided attention is being able to do multiple things at once. So for example, for those of you who like to study while also having music in the background, or if you're able to study in the brew when other people are around, this is showing that you have divided attention. Memory also improves. Again, I said memory is one of the main things that is studied for those who are interested in the information processing approach. Our memory improves both in our working memory, so what we're actively thinking, what we're actively processing at a time, and also our long-term memory storage is also improving during adolescence. Both of these are helpful as we are students, as we are tasked with harder problems, not just in school, but in life. So memory is a really important skill that, again, or um, area functioning that improves when we need it most. Processing speed also improves during adolescence. It gets faster as we get older. Not into old age. We'll talk about that when we get into the elderly, but it's improving in adolescence. Again, helpful as we are students and engaging in harder tasks, trying to think of information quicker. This is very helpful. Organization is improved during adolescence. We are more planful. This means that we can think through things when we have to do our homework, how we're going to get it done, how much time we have for this, that, and the other. All of these things are very helpful in our lives as students. Lastly, metacognition also appears here, so I know that this is confusing, but metacognition is a broad change, but it is a broad change that stems from the information processing literature. So thinking about our own thoughts. When we map this onto the research from the beginning, it explains why adolescents are better at abstract thinking, at multidimensional thinking, and hypothetical reasoning. So these findings from the information processing literature do map onto those 5 original main changes that are taking place, or this is what's informing those 5 main changes that are taking place. Just think about how each of these, attention, memory, processing speed, organization, and metacognition, are helpful to us in different areas of our lives. I've given examples of how they're helpful to us as students, but how could they also be useful for other areas of life, for our relationships, for our jobs? All of these are extremely useful facets of processing that help us as we go about our daily lives.